momentarily.
Yeah.
There we go.
Good. Okay. Dear colleagues and friends, all national focal points for periodical reporting and World Heritage Site managers across the Asia-Pacific region, colleagues from the advisory bodies to the World Heritage Committee, ICOMOS, IUCN, and ICROM, UNESCO Field Office colleagues, World Heritage Category 2 centers under the auspices of UNESCO. Good morning, good afternoon to you all. This is Dr. Fen Jin, Chief of Asia Pacific Unit of the World Heritage Center, speaking from UNESCO headquarters in Paris. Welcome to all, and thank you for attending the 16th Thursday morning training debriefing session organized by the World Heritage Center for the periodical reporting exercise in the Asia and the Pacific region. This is the last in-depth session, and we would like to dedicate some time to addressing issues about two important elements of the World Heritage System: urban heritage conservation and sustainable development. Today's presentations will include the World Heritage Cities Program, tools and initiatives for urban heritage, the implementation of the recommendation on historical urban landscape from the World Heritage perspective, key aspects of sustainable development as part of the 1972 Convention, the whole recommendation in the Asia-Pacific region and its integration into daily management of World Heritage, WH-Trap's work on urban heritage and questions of sustainability in the Asia-Pacific State of Conservation reports, and key lessons learned on urban heritage sustainable practices in the region. In addition to being topics raised in several parts of the periodical reporting questionnaire, urban heritage and sustainable development are two aspects of World Heritage that are regularly highlighted by the World Heritage Committee as it reviews the state of conservation of many properties during its annual sessions. As we will see, urban heritage represents a very substantial part of the World Heritage List and faces a number of specific challenges, notably centering around the coexisting needs for the protection of heritage, socio-economic development, and the modern life of communities that live in or near heritage sites. The 2011 UNESCO recommendation on the historical urban landscape presents an important framework for heritage management in the urban setting. And we will look at this in more detail today, both in theory and through practical examples. With the 2030 agenda, questions of sustainability have been inscribed at the core of the United Nations work. And thus, of all its member states, this, of course, very much includes UNESCO and the World Heritage Center. Today, we will look at how questions of sustainable development have become increasingly important for the management of World Heritage and what tools are at your disposal to foster the sustainability of all aspects of heritage protection and management. The periodical reporting questionnaire also focuses on many aspects of sustainable development and the 2030 agenda, and we will see how you can best address them in the questionnaire. To help us look closely at these two key topics, I'm very happy to be joined today by some special guests. First, Ms. Jyoti Hosagarafa, Deputy Director of the UNESCO World Heritage Center. and Ms. Marie-Noëlle Tourneau, representative of WH-Periodic Shanghai. They will deliver presentations on urban heritage and sustainable development and how they relate to the 1972 Convention and our day-to-day work. I would like to thank them both for taking the time to come and share some thoughts with us today. My colleagues from the World Heritage Center's periodical reporting team, we also deliver brief presentations on how today's topics appear within the questionnaire and in key text linked to the convention. At the end of the session, we have planned some time to open the floor and respond to questions from the participants, and all presenters will be available to answer your questions. As in previous weeks, this session will be recorded and the video and presentations shared with the site managers after the session. Since this topic is also very relevant to the World Heritage site managers, we have invited site managers to join us for this session. As before, we strongly encourage that the national focal points for periodical reporting share the recording and the presentation materials with the site managers after the session as well, especially they may not all have been available to attend the live event. Let me take this opportunity to express once again my thanks to the government of Republic of Korea, whose support via the funds in trust of the Cultural Heritage Administration with UNESCO makes these training sessions and the close follow-up of the periodical reporting exercise in the Asia-Pacific region possible. And now I'll pass the floor to my colleagues from the World Heritage Center, who will update us on the progress of the periodical reporting exercise and provide us with a general introduction to SDGs related questions within the questionnaire and the baseline information on the whole recommendation and the 2015 policy document adopted by the General Assembly of the state parties to the convention. Dear Anadol and Akane, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fang, and good morning, everybody. It's very lovely to see you all again today here for our last session in the series of online training sessions that we've organized for periodic reporting. I would like to start today just with a little bit of housekeeping, and first of all, with thanks to all of you for the very good progress with the questionnaire so far. We are at about 85% completion now across section 1 and section 2 on average, which is excellent progress, and I'm very grateful for all of your efforts. This is really helpful in ensuring that our early review team can start to do their work for section 1, which is ongoing, and for section 2 after the early completion deadline at the end of this month. And as a quick reminder on 2 key points, there is no need to submit the questionnaires for the early review. We have access to all of the data that you have entered, and as do the reviewers. And so no need to click on submit. It's all good. You can submit towards the end of the reporting window. Otherwise, you lock your questionnaire and you lock the questionnaire of the properties as well. For both sections. And the second little housekeeping point is that for the early review system, which is our next step, because we're by no means disappearing about this exercise from you just because these training sessions are ending. Our reviewers will be in touch with you individually on a case-by-case basis and as needed. And if you have any questions, of course, you can use the usual channels, our email, wh-periodicreporting@unesco.org, and the Teams platform and all of that to get in touch with us with any questions or issues that you may be encountering. Now, let me try and share my little presentation for this morning. Once it does. Okay. I'd like to just start with a quick overview of how the two topics of today, which have ramifications that go very, very far beyond periodic reporting and really are transversal questions for a lot of World Heritage and a lot of the list, relate to the questionnaire and to the questions that you either have already answered and may want to have a quick look back at after this session, or that you still need to answer in the questionnaire. And for that, we'll have a quick look at SDGs and urban heritage, and just to give you some baseline information as well about this, so that our presenters can move beyond the basics and take us straight into the meat of the question. As you know, preserving the world's cultural and natural heritage is considered vital to ensuring a sustainable future, and that has been a guiding thought for all of the work that has been done in recent years, especially with regard to questions of sustainability. World Heritage properties are examples of places of special significance to humankind, and they need to demonstrate outstanding universal value, which also means that they're a platform to demonstrate the importance of heritage for sustainable development. And there are many ways in which properties can contribute to sustainable development. That can be because of their environmental sustainability, because they help with the preservation of natural resources, with terrestrial and marine biodiversity, or because they constitute a fundamental contribution to environmental sustainability as a whole, especially as the good preservation and conservation of heritage sites can also help address the risks associated with both human-made and natural disasters, whether that is because of the quality of development that is ensured, or because the impacts on natural resources can be limited and addressed proactively and ahead of time. World Heritage properties are, of course, also assets for economic development, and they contribute notably to local and stable employment. There can be benefit sharing for the communities and for stakeholders across the field. And of course, one of the very important questions that have been raised regarding sustainability and World Heritage links to sustainability and tourism and sustainable tourism, for which we do have a program as well at the World Heritage Center. Finally, of course, the role that World Heritage can play in social cohesion and the fostering of peace and security is one core aspect of sustainable development. And these are all questions that are raised in the questionnaire, as we will see. And that is, this last point is especially important because World Heritage properties can provide spiritual well-being through the spiritual or aesthetic associations that come with the sites and that are often recognized as well by the World Heritage Committee. And they provide a point of focus and shared values, which is especially important for identity building or identity rebuilding purposes in conflict or post-conflict situations, as they foster tolerance, respect, and mutual understanding. And it was decided when the questionnaire was revised between the second and the third cycles to have an emphasis on questions of sustainable development. As you know, I'm sure all of our approach to sustainable development is guided by the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was adopted in 2015, as was the policy document for the integration of a sustainable development perspective into the processes of the World Heritage Convention, which is a long title which we've often abbreviated into a sustainable development policy for specifically the World Heritage Convention, which has a couple of core aims, which is notably to guide the processes of the World Heritage Convention as far as sustainability is concerned, to make the World Heritage Convention more effective and more relevant to the challenges of the 21st century, especially as the convention is a tool that is in a constant state of adaptation, and especially needs these policies, such as the Sustainable Development Policy document, to address moving challenges and to help both World Heritage stakeholders and the committee integrate evolutions in thought about World Heritage. The policy also aims to assist stakeholders to leverage the potential of World Heritage properties to contribute to sustainable development, and this includes a whole range of stakeholders, and it is, of course, because it is pertaining to the convention, a policy that is centered around the core goal of the convention, which is the protection of outstanding universal value. If you need any further information on this, you can go to our website, unesco.org, whc.unesco.org, and you see the link on the screen. There is a special page dedicated to sustainable development. The reporting in the questionnaire is asked around the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted as part of the United Nations 2030 Agenda. And it is recognized that culture plays a transversal role, and therefore so does heritage and heritage management. The SDGs are a universal call to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. And as we've seen, this very much relates also to the functions of heritage in the lives of people and communities. The key to success, as far as the SDGs are concerned, often involves tackling issues that are connected to one another. And so this is why it was particularly important to see culture as a transversal aspect across many SDGs, but of course, we also have one Sustainable Development Goal, which is Goal 11, which has target 11.4, which has become central to the convention itself, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it today, which aims to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. And so it's in this perspective that the committee adopted a revised questionnaire that had a number of questions dedicated to this, and I wanted to take you through a couple of them right now. For section 1, there are a number of references that are made to the policy across the questionnaire. This notably includes tentative lists and nominations chapters. In all cases, it relates especially to the roles and to ensuring, in line with the policy document, that all stakeholders have been involved in the processes for nomination, both at the tentative list and at the national level, for the identification of potential heritage, and as well in the management of nominations, making sure that this is not a top-down decision, but that there is also an involvement and a regular consultation with local communities, especially, and an involvement of local communities in the processes and of all stakeholders that are relevant in the management and the conservation, if possible, of properties. So this is, you'll see a number of questions in there. I won't go through them in detail. If there are any questions that arise, first, please do make use of the little guidance buttons, which you can see here as well on the screen. They contain, as always, all of the keywords, the definitions, and so on. There's quite a lot of background power in the questionnaire for all these questions. And you also have the possibility of reaching out if anything is unclear. And concerning, so you have questions, for instance, such as 4.4. I put a little example here, where you are asked to rate the extent to which the inscription of properties on the World Heritage List contributes to achieving the objectives of the 2015 Sustainable Development Policy and the 2030 Agenda, and you are given a number of options to do so with a rating scale. You also have questions in section 1 that pertain to the integration of conservation and protection of cultural and natural heritage as a strategic element in basically asking how effectively the state party integrates conservation and protection into national sustainable development policies and strategies. And you always have the opportunity of commenting as well on these questions. A lot of this is based on rating scales to say, whether or not this is applicable and to what degree it is relevant. And I'll just speed a little bit through this because time is passing, but we will share with you the highlights of the key questions of the questionnaire that have to do with sustainable development. For section 1, I just wanted to highlight the chapters 1 and 9 that have to do with basically the means that are given to the implementation of the convention, especially with regard to the sustainable development policy. And that again has to do with outreach capacities, with the financing that is placed behind it, the development of capacities of stakeholders, of key stakeholders in World Heritage, and you're asked to assess this and to see to what extent this extends beyond just the immediate people involved in the day-to-day running of operations. And yes, you have a number of other questions. For section 2, you are asked to rate the extent to which the management system of your property contributes towards achieving the objectives of the World Heritage Committee policy on sustainable development. Same thing, this is a rating scale, and there are a number of questions, especially in the management section, that will be very relevant in terms of defining and how the goals of the Sustainable Development Policy are implemented through the management system. Sustainable development is obviously also a very transversal topic that covers that is reflected in almost every aspect of World Heritage management. And so it's no surprise that it's reflected across the questionnaire as well. And you'll also be asked in line with the provisions of the questionnaire, of the policy, excuse me, to rate notably the availability and the training opportunities as well of professionals in a number of disciplines. This is a direct result of the recommendations of the policy. And you also have to rate the contributions to sustainable development, whether or not this has been considered an indicator for management and for the properties. Finally, there is also a question on the impact of the World Heritage status, which also relates to sustainable development. Make use of the guidance as well. This one is explained, if I recall correctly, in the guidance. Now, concerning urban heritage and its relationship to the questionnaire, again, I won't give a long definition of the concept of urban heritage or the UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape, which was adopted in 2011 by the UNESCO General Conference by acclamation. Just to say that you will find a lot of information at the address that shows now on screen, and that it's an additional tool that integrates policies and practices of conservation of the built environment into the wider goals of urban development in respect of the inherited values and traditions of different cultural contexts. And it especially addresses the complex needs of heritage in an urban settings, because it is not an isolated and disconnected element that exists and enshrined and unchanging on its own, but it very much needs to have a function, a life, and a relationship with its immediate urban environment, with the development of the cities and the evolutions of society. And I'm sure that there'll be quite a lot of talk about this. And just as a last point, that it's a soft law that is to be implemented by member states on a voluntary basis. This is not part of the convention text itself. In the questionnaire itself, just very briefly, there are a couple of questions that relate directly to the HAL recommendation. You have it in question 251 of section 1, which asks whether state parties using the provision of two recommendations, the 1972 recommendation, which is the little sister of the convention, if you will, and the 2011 recommendation, historic urban landscape, and you're asked to assess whether or not the provisions are used. And similarly, in question 512, which is dedicated to the HAL recommendation, you are asked to indicate which steps the state party has taken to implement the recommendation. And you also have comment boxes as well to specify the exact nature of that implementation if you so desire. Comment boxes are always entirely optional. Section 2, urban heritage obviously is covered by the factors affecting the property, either positively or negatively, and it shows up in a number of questions. It is also in question 535, which asks whether any use has been made of the 2011 recommendation in developing policy and best practices for the protection of the property, and you're rating essentially the use of the recommendation. Again, this can be picked up, as we have seen in previous sessions, for the identification of your goals. If this is something that you will then select in chapter 13, when all of your answers are summarized and you are asked to pick core priorities for the future, this will be, of course, one of the options, reinforcing the implementation of the HAL recommendation. Before I hand over the floor, just a quick word on monitoring indicators, because it has directly to do with all of these questions. Monitoring indicators were developed as part of the third cycle of periodic reporting as a way to report on trends, especially at the regional level, and possibly, if the committee decides so, at the global level in the end. And the idea behind it was to have a number of questions that had been flagged ahead of time in the questionnaire as answering specific or relating to specific topics. Especially one of them is sustainable development, and there are a number of the questions that I've highlighted just before, from which the results are extracted and which can lead to a specific analysis of how sustainable development, and to some extent, if we manage, how urban development questions are handled across one region and possibly across all the regions, especially as they relate to questions of sustainability, inclusive social development and economic development, as well as the fostering of peace and security. These are things that will show up again, and I'm sure we'll talk about them in a few months once you've completed your work and we have started the analysis of the questionnaire and we have a preliminary analysis and we can discuss action plans for the region or sub-regional action plans with the national focal points. We'll talk again about these very specific questions based on the analysis of the data that you are all kindly providing us with at the moment. And with this, I'm very happy to hand over the floor to Jyoti Hosagrahar, Deputy Director of the World Heritage Center, who will talk about, in much more depth, about both sustainable development at the 1972 convention and urban heritage and the historic urban landscape as it relates to World Heritage properties. Thank you very much, and over to you, Jyoti.
Good morning. Thank you very much. And a warm welcome to all of you for joining us today. I think you've already had a very good overview of everything that needs to be done question by question. I'm going to just turn on my presentation. Give me a second. And dive right into the two topics which we will be addressing today. I'm trying to see. Do you see my screen?
Yes, go ahead and go into presentation mode. Perfect.
Okay,
We're all
great.
set.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to talk about urban heritage and sustainable development and the historic urban landscape recommendation and approach. So very quickly, of course, you're already familiar with some of these points regarding the conservation of urban heritage, which is that, of course, we have the conservation and safeguarding. We have an entry point with the 2011 recommendation. So the first is really the 1972 convention, the second is the recommendation, and the third is also the 2030 agenda and the new urban agenda, which all cities, by the way, are obligated to implement. So regardless of which country you're in, they've all signed on to the 2030 agenda and the new urban agenda, and all the cities are investing in it, are taking forward these initiatives. Now, I know that you've heard this for several times, but I just want to repeat a couple of things because you will see the connection when I talk about it later. The outstanding universal value, of course, is the most important thing that we're trying to protect about the World Heritage, the OUV means cultural or natural significance that is so exceptional as to transcend national boundaries and to be of common importance for the present and future generations. So it is of highest importance to the international community. And again, I'm sure you've seen this image earlier in all of these different periodic reporting discussions and meetings, but I just want to highlight again because I'm going to talk a little bit more about these conditions. So the OUV, which we're trying to protect of the World Heritage properties, stand on three pillars. First is that they continue to meet the criteria for which they were inscribed. The second is the conditions of integrity and authenticity continue to be met. And the third is the protection and management. And what we're really now focusing on a bit is the protection and management, because that, in the end, ensures that the conditions of integrity and authenticity continue to be met and the criteria continue to be valid. So, and when the protection and management of urban sites in particular fail, then the OUV fails. And for urban heritage, it's a bit tricky because, as I mentioned, the OUV of the site, and this could be, I'm saying that there are two ways to look at urban heritage. One is sites which are urban properties, which is that they're not single buildings or a sort of contained complex of buildings, but are historic cities, historic centers that have living, people living in them, they're working there, there's shops, it's stations, roads, bridges, things happening there, which is people and their aspirations are living in those cities. And managing heritage conservation with this is complex. And the second way to look at it is urban is any single property, it could be a single monument or a complex that is located in and around, within an urban area where the pressures of urban development are playing onto the site, and the site itself is connected to these to the life of the vicinity of the area around the city of the people. So even though the property itself may be inscribed, the boundaries of the property may be quite small, in fact, for the life of that property, the relationship to the surrounding area is very important. And that is part of the historic urban landscape approach. So the recommendation on the historic urban landscape was adopted in November of 2011. So that's actually 10 years ago. So we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the historic urban landscape recommendation. And it is, as Anatole said earlier, a soft law to be implemented by the member states on a voluntary basis. It's a soft law because unlike the 1972 convention, which is ratified and then an obligation for the countries to implement, the states parties to implement, in the case of the recommendation, it is a voluntary. It's on a voluntary basis. And it is basically a tool to integrate policies and practices of conservation of the built environment into the wider goals of urban development, so that the inherited values and traditions of the different contexts can be integrated into all aspects of urban development. Very many times it's the governance issues that you will be evaluating, because if there is a management plan, but there's no relationship, in the case of urban heritage, no relationship between the management plan and the city development plan, for example, or the master plan, then no matter what you do with the management plan, there is no bearing on what the city continues to do and develop. So this integration, this relationship is very important to be able to ensure. The recommendation itself talks about the idea of the historic urban landscape approach as something that approaches the city as a set of layers, looking at the cultural and natural values and attributes, extending beyond the notion of just the historic ensemble or the historic center. Because even in a historic center, as you see in these images, you have the larger setting, for instance, setting where the site is on a hillside or close to water. There might be rivers, there might be a desert climate that it's located in. And there are communities of people with traditional practices that are an integral part of the identity of the city. And so all of these aspects of its infrastructure above and below ground, its open spaces, its land use patterns, spatial organization, its social and cultural practices, economic processes, and intangible dimensions of heritage, which are place associated, its diversity and identity, are all important parts of its attributes, and need to be part of the, they contribute to the integrity and authenticity of the city, so of the property. So it's very important to be able to ensure that these are retained and protected as much as possible. So UNESCO's approach in managing urban heritage, then, using the historic urban landscape approach, is holistic, integrating the goals of urban heritage conservation with those of socioeconomic development. And this sees urban heritage as a social, cultural, and economic resource for the development of cities. So the whole approach includes, as you can see here, built heritage, tangible elements, it could be monuments or other tangible elements, and it's universal because it's important globally. So it looks at urban areas as layers of social, economic, spatial relationships between the built heritage, natural environment, and local communities. And we also look, of course, as I said, at the relationships between the tangible and intangible. Now, when you see, if you look, they're often considered opposites. So if you see built heritage and natural heritage, they're seen as unconnected or tangible and intangible. And we're really emphasizing here the relationships. And most importantly, the universal and the local, because people who are living in and around those properties, which are urban in particular, there's a very close association. And as I said, when you have an urban development plan or a city development plan, that's very local. And of course, that's important. Those are local aspirations for the development. But there's also universal value. There's the outstanding universal value. So how these two are interrelated is very critical. So essentially, the whole approach, the historic urban landscape approach, shifts the focus from monuments to the urban fabric as a whole, and goes beyond the notion of a historic center. So we could also look at it in a sense that we are looking at a city as a process that is characterized by change, which is not just about freezing the city in a particular way, but managing that change very carefully. Because of course, if there are people living there, there are small bits of things that continue to happen. The question is, what is small and what is that bit, and how is that being managed? We can also look at it in terms of reading multiple layers of urban morphology. And so, as I said, you can start to document all of these layers, so and the planning and management structures, so that you can look at it in terms of mapping. So, there's a lot of documentation that needs to have been done, which is for the intangible, the memories, narratives, archives, written iconographic documents, festivals, the planning management structures, the traditional planning methods, the analysis of land ownership, tenure, economic activities, the regulations that are in place, the financial aspects. So all of these are integral to the whole approach. Now, I just want to go over very briefly the idea of the attributes of urban heritage identity, which came out of an expert meeting in Fukuoka in Japan in 2020. So when you look at it and you start to document the different attributes, you see that one could look at an urban area at different scales and in different ways. So the very wider context, you could look at the skylines, the valleys, the hills, the natural features, the hydrology, topography, the views and vistas, the spatial patterns, the orientation, especially with regard to the water bodies, the ocean, seaside, or mountains, riverfronts, and the origins of the city plan. So all of these are at the very larger scale. And then you have the city scale itself, which is looking at the axes in the city walls, maybe streetscapes, street sections, festival routes, or markets, specific architectural identities. There could be historical public spaces, open spaces, again, vistas and views. Sometimes there are cities that have stairways as part of their feature because there are different levels. There could be canal systems, underground water systems that have come down over a period of time. There's also the spatial organization of the plot sizes. Each of these add to the identity of the city. That's why I'm listing them here. So one could look at it in terms of, all of the different aspects that contribute to making that contribute to the attributes and the identity of the historic city. Then you have the monument scale itself, or the building scale, where you have the materials, the building techniques, which could be traditional building techniques. There could be color, texture, craftsmanship, design qualities, the height, volume, and so on. And then you have the elements of intangible cultural heritage, which are specific, that are place associated. So it could be festivals, dances, music, markets, community congregations, a sense of ownership, or other types of social cultural spirit. So in terms of how this is protected and what you would assess in terms of how it's being protected, I think what's really important, as I mentioned, first and foremost, and this is looking at the way the whole recommendation can be implemented, the first and foremost is the governance structure, so the management system for the World Heritage properties that coordinates across agencies and institutions. This is very key. So if you have an urban management plan that has no coordination with any other sector within the city, then even if you have a good management plan, it cannot be implemented because it is totally without any connections to the infrastructure development plan, the transportation plan, the tourism plan, the housing plan, all of which are what cities do. The second is being able to assess the sustainable development status, needs, and priorities, because obviously in every place the sustainable development needs are different, and this needs to be assessed before undertaking any new intervention. So there needs to be a discussion with the residents to arrive at a consensus with stakeholder consultations on these sustainable needs and priorities. And then we also, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, implement the Culture 2030 indicators, the UNESCO Culture 20 indicators, to assess the conditions of sustainable development. Having detailed inventories, mapping, surveying, registry of all the buildings to be able to assess, because even within a historic city, it's not that every single building has the same importance for the overall OUV or for the to maintain the attributes. There could be some specific building which is already falling apart, which is quite small, that maybe is possible to be removed. So these have to be decided very carefully. We also need to assess the vulnerabilities of the attributes. What are the threats that exist in a place in relation to the change, including socioeconomic stresses and the impacts of climate change. So if you have rising water from the rising sea level change, for example, that could have an impact, or it could be that you have extremely poor communities and they're absolutely neglected community living, then they're unable to take care of the maintenance of their properties. So because not all the properties are state owned, there are also privately owned properties. So all of these can become threats, and sometimes there are many places where people start to remove because the socioeconomic stresses are so much. They remove stones or they remove wooden pillars to sell them, because that enables them to survive. So the attributes to be able to conserve the attributes and to conserve the aspects of the city of the heritage. It's not just by physical conservation, is what I'm trying to say, that the sustainable development matters a lot, because sometimes being able to address the community issues can help to protect the heritage, and this is important to bear in mind. There's also the integration and coherence, so that the attributes of urban heritage identity and their vulnerability status are made coherent with the new development plans that are designing any development programs. So as I said, and as has been pointed out earlier, anytime any new intervention is undertaken, first of all, it has to be ensured that this is in coherence with other interventions that are being undertaken in the city and continue to protect the heritage value. And then also to ensure that impact assessments are carried out. So priority projects are identified and impact assessments are carried out at an early stage, and then adjustments made accordingly. So if there's a new project that is being proposed, it's really important that there is a system of impact assessment that is put in place, and that the World Heritage Center is notified early on when these projects are proposed. It's also really, really key to establish partnerships with local communities, with all the stakeholders, and with finance institutions, so that there is a public-private, different types of public and private actors are brought together. And finally, there needs to be a lot of capacity building, not only for the officials who are managing it, but officials at all levels, and also for the local communities, for the businesses, so that they understand what the significance is and how this is to be maintained. Because especially in cities, there is often a sense that because people are living there and it's World Heritage, that it is their city and they don't need to worry about the World Heritage part of it, which has international engagement, that there's a global value to the outstanding universal value. The OUV is a global value, and so this is often forgotten. I want to move now to talk a little bit, which is very related to talk about the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy. Now, this was a policy that was adopted in 2015 by the World Heritage, the General Assembly of the States Parties to the World Heritage Convention. And so in a way, you know, the 2030 agenda actually was adopted about the same time. So it was adopted in September of 2015, and the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy was adopted in November. So in fact, they were developed about the same time. So although there are lots of convergences, the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy by itself is not identical to the 2030 agenda. But I will show you in a minute how we have created and we have identified, aligned, and identified the synergies. So the key dimensions of the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy is environmental sustainability, inclusive social development, inclusive economic development, and fostering of peace and security. Now, as you know, sustainable development as a concept has three pillars: the social, the economic, and the environmental pillars. And very often people think that heritage conservation works in isolation and only belongs to the environmental dimension, because you're preserving something, that built environment perhaps. And as you see even in the 2030 agenda, it's only identified within goal 11.4 on the conservation of cultural and natural heritage. But in fact, as you see here, there are key dimensions, because World Heritage properties, there are two ways again to look at this. The first is that for the sustainability of the World Heritage properties to be managed effectively, the overall environmental sustainability, there being socioeconomic inclusion, and there being economic development that's inclusive and equitable, and that peace and security are maintained, they become conditions. Because as I explained to you, when people are in abject poverty and you have a World Heritage site, there is no value to that site to the local communities, and they may actually engage in the destruction of those sites, because they're not trying to destroy the site, but because they're taking away elements of it to make money, or they have no money they don't have the resources to take care of it. And similarly, you know, if you have people who are excluded and there's a constant conflict, that's not the way that the site can possibly be. Those things impact the management of the site itself. At the same time, World Heritage properties have come down to us over centuries. So they have incredible wealth of knowledge and incredible resilience. So there's a lot of lessons that they can offer us for this. So in the end, it's really important to have, for good management, very close relationship between the World Heritage property and its conservation and the sustainable development needs and processes. We have also developed, which is still in draft stage, a kind of a health check tool to assess the World Heritage Sustainable Development status. And that's a tool that helps to identify and create a sort of a preliminary sustainability profile. And it also has another element, which is to look at and assess the sustainability of a project that is proposed. So design and strategy sustainability profile also enables sort of a preliminary check on, when a project is proposed, how that will impact the sustainability of the site. So these become tools for ensuring that the sustainable development is constantly enhanced in the site. Now, I'm not going to go into, obviously this is not a readable table, but I'm showing it just to sort of share with you the importance of aligning the many different international agreements that there are today. So when you look at the different types of agreements, and you may be familiar with many of these, and for certain parts of the world, certain agreements are more important than others. So you have the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy on top, which is the SDP, and I'll point it out with my arrow. And then you have the SDGs, which is the 2030 Agenda. You have the African Union Agreement, the Vision 2063. You have the New Urban Agenda, which is adopted separately and was adopted in 2016 October. And all cities, again, are obliged to implement the New Urban Agenda. You have the Sendai Framework. You have the SIDS Action Plan. You have the Paris Agreement for Climate Change. And you have the World Heritage Climate Change Policy. So what we've tried to do here is to look at alignment along these key areas. And we've added one more area, which you can't see, which is outside here, which is the area of knowledge and skills. Now, you can see here, this is the UNESCO Culture 2030 Indicator Framework, which we have developed over the last 3 years and is now currently being implemented as in pilot implementation in several countries and cities. The thematic indicators are take 169 goals and targets, 169 targets of the 17 goals, and regroup them thematically. And then we look at how cultural heritage in particular, is contributing to each of these. Because you know that that World Heritage, for example, is contributing to environment and resilience. It's contributing to sustainable management of heritage, to climate adaptation and resilience, to open space. It's contributing to prosperity and livelihoods, because many livelihoods are generated by the properties. It's contributing to knowledge and skills, and for inclusion and participation, where it's maybe promoting access to culture, the cultural participation, participatory decision-making processes. And all of these also, when I'm saying participatory decision-making processes, we're looking at the engagement of indigenous populations, marginalized people, and of course, the decision-making processes in which women are involved. So the gender equality, as you see, is a transversal. We don't have a specific area of gender equality or a specific indicator for it, because we see it as mainstreamed throughout, so that you really look at, for each of these indicators, you see the different, the sex disaggregation of the data. So this is a way for collecting data which can be done at the urban level. So it's something that we would encourage, and that would align very well with the periodic reporting, because as you see here, the periodic reporting contributes to each of these dimensions. And this is just to give you an idea of the importance of collecting the data on all of these, and the publication which you can find here. Now, I can talk a little bit more on any of these topics, but I think maybe I will stop here and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. We'll take questions for all the presentations at the end of the session. I don't know if you're free until 11.
I will not be available until 11, so maybe
Okay.
we could just finish a few questions here, and then
Absolutely.
I just wanted to share and leave you also with these different resources, the Culture Urban Future publication, and there are other links to the activities that we are carrying out, because the World Heritage Cities program, we have been carrying out a number of activities. Most importantly, there is the World Heritage City Lab and the World Heritage City Dialogues that we have been conducting, and we would greatly encourage all the cities of the Asia Pacific region. We hold the dialogues region by region. So for every every few months, we have a regional dialogue that we organize for the Asia Pacific region, and we would warmly invite each of the World Heritage Cities in the Asia-Pacific region, the site managers, to join us for this, because this is a very important forum of exchange. The Urban Notebooks is a monthly newsletter that we are sending out to all the site managers. If you're not receiving it, please go to the World Heritage Cities website, which is the World Heritage, I think it's over here. I don't see it, but it's whc.unesco.org, EN Cities. You will find it also through the main page of the World Heritage website, and then if you just look at cities, and you can subscribe for the newsletter in English or French or Spanish right on the website, and we will make sure to include you in all the future mailings. There's also World Heritage City Labs that we organize that are focused more thematically. In the past year, it has been focused more on the COVID-19 crisis, but they are also and recovery and rebuilding from it. But they're also focused on sustainable development, because obviously, especially in cities, the integration between heritage conservation and sustainable development is very central. So we look at these together. So that's also another resource that I could point out to and leave you with. And I think that with that, I will just stop and maybe take just a few questions, and then there could be others later.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. We don't have any questions in the chat so far specifically on your presentation. So if there are site managers who or national focal points who have questions, either please write them in chat as soon as possible, since we will be moving on to the next presentation soon, or use the raise hand function as always, so that you can take the floor.
Thank you very much. I would also like to mention to all of the national focal points and the site managers that we are in the process of planning a World Heritage City Forum that will be coming up in the early summer, and we've already put out information on this in the World Heritage in the Urban Notebooks, and we're sending out also a call for case studies to present at this, and so this is also a good opportunity. And the World Heritage City Labs is a forum for bringing together experts along with site managers and city authorities, and we would be very happy to organize these in conjunction with the cities of the Asia-Pacific region, particularly for addressing thematic issues such as management plans or transportation mobility issues or high rises, whatever issues that you see. These are based on the demands of what issues seem most pressing and should be addressed, and we would be happy to organize together. So please reach out to us for any of these. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. I see no raised hands. Now, if anyone has questions that you think about after the session, do feel free to share them with us, and we'll share them and pass them on to Jyoti and her team as well. If we can't answer them ourselves, or if we think that they would be interesting to be shared, and we'll be sure to get back to you as well. And we're very happy to have good email exchanges every day with many of you. So we'll be very happy to pass on any questions you have after that. Thank you very much, Jyoti, for your presentation. I think it's been extremely helpful in putting also all of both urban heritage and sustainable development questions into context, and seeing how they are practical tools for World Heritage and not sort of things that exist in dissociated from both the convention and the realities day-to-day of World Heritage sites. So thank you so much, and we'll be sure to pass on any questions that come up to you. Thank you very much. And now I'm very happy to pass the floor to Marie-Noëlle Tourneau of wh Shanghai, who will present the work that our Category 2 Center at wh under the auspices of UNESCO has been doing on these two topics, especially as it relates to urban environment. They have notably published a very, very interesting set of case studies and a study about this, and I'm sure that we'll hear a lot about this right now. And so without any further delay, Marie-Noëlle, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, let me try and share my screen. Is this working? Firstly, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
and
on
we
both
can see your
counts.
screen.
And now, do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So thank you very much for inviting me to share some thoughts on HUL. It's always a pleasure to attend these meetings or take part. So my name is Marie-Noëlle Tourneau. I work as the project director at wh in Shanghai, and HUL is actually a key element for wh. So there might be a few overlaps with what the first presentations were saying, or what Jyoti just said. So I'll try and be slightly more focused. But we've all been underlining the issue of managing change and this challenge of integrating urban heritage conservation and urban developments, with breaking this divide. So as we saw, most of the World Heritage List properties are urban heritage or heritage in an urban context, meaning you can have basically settlements, villages in cultural landscapes, which are not necessarily listed as cities, but do have these issues, which in a term can also impact the specific OUV of some of the sites. So in time, and especially around the turn of the century, there were more and more state of conservation reports, more and more on urban issues, and one of the key elements with this economic boom all around, was this issue of high-rise, because cities were modernizing. There was high-rise sprouting everywhere. And so there was a first reflection with Vienna. It was not the first, but one of the major case was Vienna, with the construction of a hub, with transport hub and buildings and offices, etc. And there was a whole discussion with the World Heritage Center to discuss this case, and that led actually the Austrian authorities actually organized with the center a conference, a meeting, which one of the results was the Vienna Memorandum, which was more specifically addressing this issue of integrating contemporary architecture in a historic environment. But that paved the way to continuing the reflection on the sort of the wider aspect, which is not just contemporary architecture, but managing or handling or addressing the issue of what do we do in an urban context with a lot of pressure. So Jyoti said, and Feng and Anatole, recommendation is a UNESCO tool, so it has has to go through a certain process. But the whole process was a way of sort of rethinking about the tools. UNESCO hadn't really produced any new normative tools in 35 years. The first idea was to actually update some of the existing documents, but finally the idea was really to come up with something new, because the background and this issue of considering landscape, considering larger environment, considering the city, considering public work, considering development, there's a whole body of documents which existed before. Most of them you know of, or they're also in the questionnaire of the periodic reporting to see the links. So it's not entirely new, of course, but probably what's the way of putting it and the change of paradigm is maybe the phrase managing change, and also more and more focus on people or communities. And again, we've seen it's a trend in the World Heritage Convention, more and more focus on people with, and you know about the 5 C's and the addition of communities. So this is table of content of HUL. You can Jyoti showed us we can find everything on the World Heritage site. The convention, the recommendation being a UNESCO document. It is in the 6 official languages of UNESCO. It's not just a World Heritage document. It's a UNESCO tool, so it's available in the 6 official languages. What's extremely important and interesting with the HUL approach is this definition of the understanding of a city or historic city. The term of landscape is really used in the geographer's perspective. So it's seen from above. It's a system. It's a geographical setting. It's not the vedute. It's not the painter's viewpoint, though. The visual viewpoint, the landscape, is also important in that regard. So it's, as mentioned before, this idea of the layering and natural and cultural. So in this regard, it changes also the perspective of what are we talking about, what are the values, what do we define, but who's involved, who's engaged as actors, and also in terms of responsibility. Again, HUL is not a definition only of a type, of a category. It's not a World Heritage category, a historical urban landscape, cultural landscape. It's not a HUL category. And again, embedded in the historical urban recommendation, there is this idea of quality of the human environment. So linking again sustainable development, livelihood. We're talking about the past, but we're talking about the present. It's not only the future, it's the present. How do we address the needs of the present? And if we go back to link with the World Heritage Convention, it's already there. Article 5, especially 5A, was this reference to also the function, a function in life of the community, and integrated in protection and planning programs. So this idea of function, living heritage, sustainability was already embedded in the text of 72. So to come back to our Asia Pacific region, we've been looking, it was a month ago, looking at some of the threats and looking at the trends in conservation between 2010 and 2019, which is between the two cycles of the periodic reporting. We've seen, of the list of threats. Among the key issues that come up are, not surprisingly, you've seen that and we know that, the idea of management, governance, and urban development are really part of the key issues. And then they're intertwined and connected to other things, such as tourism pressure, which also has a lot of impact on the way sites are managed or urban environments are developed or managed. Of course, there's a very specific issue of warfare and social conflict. And that was in particular true with Bamiyan. And more in detail, the issue of demolition, rebuilding, but also we mustn't forget rural areas. That was a key element also in the SOC analysis, but it's also related to HUL. Why am I talking about agricultural and farmland? But also because we're looking at a territorial aspect, and also in rural areas you do have settlements and small villages. So these are the ways of looking at how can HUL actually help to address these issues and are relevant. So as presented by Jyoti, and especially when she presented the results of the Fukuoka meeting, expert meeting that was held in January in 2020, HUL proposes a number of tools, which are 4. The names, I mean, they're wider than just the titles, but civic engagement tools, again, is really stressing the importance of multiple actors, not just experts, not just technicians, not just politicians, but people. I mean, the people, the inhabitants, the communities, and engagement, meaning, and that's also governance, and it's also accountability. So these are the important aspects. Knowledge and planning, you can't define, you can't conserve and preserve and develop if you don't know what you're talking about. So you really need to know what are your attributes. If they are defined, if your value is defined within a World Heritage Framework through OUV, that's necessary, but then you have to really detail the attributes, the physical, what's carrying those attributes, and what is fragile and what can be threatened or destroyed, and linking knowledge with planning. You can have the best knowledge and the best planning, but if you don't have a robust regulatory system, it's not going to be applied. So that's also important. Also linked to capacity, finance, but also human resources, of course. So allow me to go through a couple of examples. Colleagues, please stop me or just wave when you see that time is running out. So we said that we have urban heritage, and we also have sites and elements within an urban context. So this is also one of the famous cases in the Asia Pacific case in Iran of Isfahan, which is a major park, public space, wonderful buildings, and a complex within an urban context, a dense urban context. And there was this project in the late 90s of building a high-rise building for commercial and office space. It was authorized and it was actually built. So on the picture, I don't know if you see my arrow, but it's on the left-hand side picture in the little circle. So in this case, it was a typical situation of the issue of visual integrity. What you see from the site, from heritage, is impacted by something that sticks out and threatens and impacts on the sort of horizontal view, and there's a pattern of horizontal with nothing sticking out from the horizon. There are hundreds of cases throughout the World Heritage Sites. If you look at the state of conservation throughout the world, I mean, zillions of cases like this. This was an interesting struggle, and the authorities, the state authorities, but also the city, took 11 years. But at the end, they actually decided to cut down a few stories. So there was a mitigation of actually solving the issue, the difficult way, because it cost more money to actually go through a process of cropping a building than if it had been planned another way. That would have been more effective. So that's one of the cases where the issue of modernization of a city, new services, issue of integrating contemporary architecture. It's outside the site, it's outside the boundary, but it definitely has impact because it's an issue of visual integrity. Another case, and I'll be referring to in Laos, the VATPU and the Association of Asian Settlements within the Champasak cultural landscape. So why am I referring to a cultural landscape and even more to an archaeological site? Well, it's also to address this issue of transport infrastructure and address again this issue of a very large scale, and also address the question of projects that are at a territorial, really large scale and go beyond the site. in this cultural landscape, it's by a river, by the Mekong River, and there are plenty of human settlements, small villages. So they don't carry the value per se, but they're there, and they're part of the territory, they're part of the element. So you cannot not consider them. The whole issue was here to build a new road, new expressway. So we have really large-scale, national, international level issues of connection, transport. This is for the development of the country, of the area. Going with that was an issue of improvement of a water system, which again was large-scale and was impacting the way the projects were developed first were going to impact the site proper. So again, this is a typical situation. Development, improve quality of life through transport, whether that was a good idea or not, I'm not judging that, but also a water system. No one cannot agree with the improvement of bringing water to settlements and a site. So here again, the whole issue is upstream, developing a project. So the HUL approach can, through the identification of values, promoting a larger scale approach, and also multi-sectoral, because of course, if it's the authority or the institution in charge of an archaeological site, they will more often than not be consulted when it's a large scale national level infrastructure project. So that's where the convention, as you know, but also HUL can be useful to say, well, we have our word to say, we are conservation people, we are at the local level, the national level, but actually we have a tool here which should allow us to discuss and plan ahead and discuss upstream. This issue of transport, this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek example. It's got nothing to do with World Heritage, it's got to do with heritage. It's in Tokyo in Japan, and it's because of the forthcoming Olympic Games. This was an example of a major bridge in Tokyo, which has a strong symbolic and historical value. The bridge was destroyed, rebuilt in the early 20th century, and still today has a very important value. But because of the Olympics and the need to develop more infrastructure, well, freeway was built on top, and it's still the case today. I'm showing this also to show the extreme, how things can, how far things can go, but also the projects at the bottom of the slide. These are not real projects. This is like paper. It's an imaginary project. But again, it's this reflection to show the evolution of how thinking and paradigm changes. Japan has major issues in terms of earthquakes, and any major infrastructure has very, very strong requirements. But again, the thinking of reclaiming a riverfront, reclaiming values. So again, today, how can this holistic approach, considering heritage, considering different departments in charge, considering also how can the actors, the stakeholders and players can be involved, again, upstream when writing and drafting the project brief, so that within the requirement there are impact assessment and things like that. This issue of transport, there are many infrastructure issues. We have cases in Pakistan, Shalimar, with the issue of the metro line. Georgetown also addressed this issue. There was also a metro line, and they handled the project with impact assessment and considering how to look at the fringe of the site. So these are really common issues around the world. Again, inviting you to consider rural areas, and this is to touch upon also what Jyoti was saying about livelihood. And again, as you know, for this site, we have a water network, but we also have settlements and villages. How do we maintain livability, the economic element? And this is where, when considering the World Heritage Convention, we can also look at other tools. I mean, the other recommendations are the other convention that are referred to in the questionnaire, but it can also be like the food and FAO programs like GIAS, the globally important agricultural heritage systems, which also propose a dynamic conservation. So again, the starting point was talking about urban site and urban areas, and we've already been through a larger scale and looking also at landscapes we don't directly have urban values, but again, where the HUL approach can actually help in terms of raising awareness, putting people around the table, and also having a more upstream approach, more into, let's say, the thick of urban challenges regarding governance and management. Very challenging site in Uzbekistan, the historic center of Shravat. Sorry for pronunciation. This is horrible. In Azerbaijan, there were discussions in 2019 on inscribing the site on there was list endangered and even delisting, so it was gone that far. So a major challenge of issues of governance, issues of a legal system, urban planning tools, and identifying attribute. So the whole project of actually making the site look better, or the challenge of the city of thinking how we need hotels, how can we cater for visitors, and how. So again, basically a lack of coordination, a lack of vision, extreme difficulties in bringing things together. So there's whole work in progress now, looking at putting together planning tools. And again, you can have the most robust urban planning regulatory system if there's no legal system, if there's not the implementation system, it can't work. I mean, sites again like Georgetown or Luang Prabang in Laos have very, very strong systems, but they can have the urban tool, but if at some point the management doesn't follow, the problems occur. Regarding the impact also of destruction of the fabric, this issue here in Uzbekistan was as you start destroying house by house, how at what point is there no integrity left of a city, of the urban fabric? That's an issue. And in cases also where you have encroachment, there are different factors or situations, like for an archaeological site like Bam, which was destroyed by an earthquake. One of the issues related to management and related to the urban development was the encroachment, which was linked to post-disaster. So the reasons for threatening urban heritage or urban values are really, really diverse. Same could be said also of Kathmandu, who had to face the major challenges of reconstruction after the earthquake. So how these in-between processes are difficult to handle. Jyoti mentioned the 8 steps, so I'll quickly go. I won't go to the details, but again, you can find this document on the World Heritage Center's webpage. If you go to the HUL webpage, the whole idea with this project was to operationalize how to make it more practical, because HUL in a way could be considered as a guidance, a sort of a proposal to see things and think slightly differently, especially in terms of process. And here it goes a bit more into the detail, and it links the 4 tools I was referring to and several steps. So it's again trying to provide food for thought and examples to when in a process of having to plan, a management plan, or develop a territorial planning at a larger scale, or even an urban planning scale. It could be useful. So I won't go into the detail of that. And again, what's the point? I mean, what's the final point? The final point is really flipping the coin around. It's not really, it's trying, I mean, the ideal situation is where it's fully understood that heritage is really an asset for development. I mean, looking at the intrinsic qualities of heritage values, how can they help for better building design? Because maybe you're thinking in terms of what are construction and building attributes in historic and traditional ways that can help. I mean, it can be also traditional know-how in earth architecture. You have fancy, high-rise, glamorous earth architecture today. So it can be new buildings using traditional materials. Transport infrastructure. Okay, why only consider the earthquake issue, and why not consider the value of heritage as something to put in the brief, into the impact assessment brief, and also consider traditional routes, which can be a basis for rethinking transport and infrastructure, and all the way along. I mean, there are many things, if we look at traditional know-how or historical areas, which are modern and can be used again. Just why is the settlement where it is? When we look at over-urbanization, I mean, pouring concrete everywhere, and impact it has also on flooding and things like that. So really, again, getting out of this heritage conservation versus development, but actually look at it the other way around, how developers can actually win by rethinking about heritage. And again, obviously climate change, and this is definitely something on the table we're thinking about, and it's a key issue. Also financial constraints, I mean, rethinking the city, rethinking spaces and places. COVID is a fantastic, unfortunately, opportunity to rethink. I mean, we've seen that mono activity such as tourism is not sustainable at all. What can we learn from the COVID? I mean, maybe looking at the local public space, shorter networks, shorter circuits in terms of economy, more finding this link between local and global. So this is what HUL is about, really. And I mean, the absolute goal is war and peace, of course. That's the sheer goal of UNESCO as a key priority. So again, not just conservation versus development, but actually really linking conservation and development as one aspect. And conservation, urban conservation is one aspect. It was in one mode of urban development. To go back to WH-Trap, we're a Category 2 centre. As I said before, HUL is one of the key elements for us. We've been very much involved. Those who knew Ron Raners, former colleague of UNESCO, he was instrumental in the development of HUL, and he was for a long time vice director there and conducted a number of activities. Here on the screen, a couple of papers we've been engaged. We've also helped. We were asked by UNESCO to work to provide a regional study for the Cultural Urban Future report. We recently, in 2018, held a workshop on the implementation of HUL that was co-organized with the center. We also linked to smaller settlements. My colleague Ana Paula, she's conducting research on small settlements in Asia. So again, the issue of HUL is linked to smaller territories such as villages. In the occasion of the 2018 meeting, there was also a show on the origins of urban conservation. WH-Trap also does a lot of training on HIAs. Again, this is something definitely linked. Unfortunately, we had to postpone. Next one is in 2022. And in October, we did a conference, online conference, was the first online conference on HUL, and especially looking at these issues of planning processes. And we hope to have other training sessions in the near future, either specifically focusing on the region or more specifically on certain topics. And we mustn't forget to celebrate the anniversary of the adoption of HUL. It was in 2011, so that was 10 years ago. So November is a big birthday date, and so we have to come up with coming up with something. I think I've been sort of taking a little extra time. That's it for me. So if there are any questions, and I'll share this PowerPoint with the World Heritage Sea colleagues so they can put it online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Noëlle. And as you've mentioned, we will share, as we have done for all the previous sessions, all of the presentations that were used today with the national focal points, who can then pass them on, as we have done in all the previous trainings so far. And with that, we wanted to give also the floor to our advisory bodies, if they are available and have some contribution. I believe Nicholas Clark from E-Commerce International was here. Nicholas, if you wanted to add something to the presentations?
Yes, thank you very much, Michelle. Can everyone hear me? Just checking. Great. Thank you very much, Marie-Noëlle, and also, of course, to Jyoti for your presentations this morning, which I found, firstly, confirmatory to the perspectives, of course, the current perspectives that we all are, and also the challenges that we're all facing with when it comes to urban heritage conservation. I want to start just with I just have 5 points that I quickly want to table, and these are some of the observations and ideas that came up in my mind during the presentations this morning. The first is that obviously at the basis of all of this is the need to develop our world towards a more sustainable system in which environmental, economical and social sustainability become the norm and not the ambition. But it might be easier to refer to, just for the audience here, to refer to the triple Ps, which I'm going to mention quickly because it's easier to remember. And those are people, planet, and no, not profit, but prosperity. So I think it's very important to bear in mind that the third P is not profit, it's prosperity. And for prosperity, it depends very much on the view lines that we take. So what are the timelines that we're looking at? When we look at these timelines, often I see in World Heritage cities and World Heritage properties that there's conflict in especially views on when and where prosperity or profit is measured. So, and I think this is an important thing. When it comes to communities, communities often take the long-term view and developers take the short-term view when it comes to profit. So that, I think, is an important thing to realize. And I'll link this to a couple of other ideas. So I've just also introduced the idea of community. In my experience, community is becoming more and more important, especially in the areas where I deal with, and I deal a lot with Africa. I have noticed that there is some frustration with communities when dealing with World Heritage because they feel disempowered and their perspectives are often not taken on board. That means that I think it's really, really imperative for site managers, focal points, to engage with communities. Local engagement is really critical. Awareness raising is critical. And when I speak of communities, yes, of course, these are the people on the ground, the inhabitants of the cities. But I also refer to the community of policymakers. We can gather as much knowledge as we can. We can do as much research as we can. But if we cannot translate that to our policymakers, then we've lost the battle. And when it comes to knowledge, one of the most important, I think, bits of knowledge that we can bring to our policymakers is the value of heritage, not so much the cultural values or historical values, but the everyday values. The fact that conservation delivers more jobs than new build, the inherent qualities that or contributions that conservation and our historic urban landscapes bring to the local economy. That brings me to my third point, which I think is something that we need to globally try to reprogram, try to rethink how we think about the world, because we tend to think of development as being new. That which is new, that is development, and that which is old, that is conservation. Now we've come to a perspective where we think of conservation and development. I would like to go one step further and change our frame of reference, because conservation is development, in my perspective. Conservation is development. It does deliver jobs. It does benefit economic growth. And it is much more sustainable in the longer term than new build, which becomes old, and we need to deal with all these concrete high-rise buildings that we are building all over the world now in 100 years' time. So when it comes to the regulatory systems, I think that coordination is absolutely key. Jyoti highlighted that also. When it comes to these regulatory systems, we also need to go and think about timelines and view lines and be sure that the decisions we make today are no regret decisions, not tomorrow, but in 20 years' time or 50 years' time. So those are some of the ideas that came up in my mind during these presentations this morning. I think this is a great challenge for us all. I think that we really, as was just said, we need to flip the coin around, and we need to be much more proactive in showing our policymakers, but also our communities, what the long-term benefits of conservation, especially in the urban environment, really are. Thank you very much, Michelle. I think I'll end it at that.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. So I think I will pass the floor to Anatol in case we have any other things that we need to take care of. And then that should be it. Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much, Michel. Do we have any other contributions from our advisory bodies before we open the floor for questions? We do need to finish on time today because all of us at the World Heritage Center have another meeting just after this one. But if not, then let's just open the floor if anyone has questions. I don't know if Valentino is still with us. I know he was very busy this morning. There was one question raised in the chat that he may want to pick up. Otherwise, we'll answer the question from I believe, the site managers from Ha Long Bay in Vietnam in writing after the session. Valentino? Okay. Otherwise, if anyone has a question, please do use your raise hand function or write it directly in the chat and we'll pick it up. Of course, we remain available at the address that is already in the chat, wh-periodicreporting@unesco.org, for any questions that you may have at any point of the process, all the way until the submission deadline.
Anatol, if you don't mind, I think it would be very important, especially since this is our last session, to mention that the early completion deadline for Section 2, as we've mentioned, is at the end of the month. But this is not the final deadline. You do have time to write and input all of the answers that you need into both Sections 1 and Sections 2 of the questionnaire. And the final deadline will be at the end of July, but we are still hoping that you can reach the early completion deadline, which is at the end of the month on the 31st. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And just as a quick reminder, because we've done this with Section 1 a handful of times already, but there is no need to click submit, and please, we do have access to the data as it is. So the early completion deadline is just internal for you to as a goal, so that our reviewers can have a look at the data and reach out as needed. The submission of the questionnaires can happen all the way up to the deadline at the end of July, and we'll very happily then log all of the questionnaires and start analyzing the data. Okay, if we have no questions, as we've said, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're very happy to answer them in writing. We have quite an intense email exchange with many of you already anyway, and we'll share if there are any crucial points that are raised. We'll be sure to share them and send you an information message or whatever is most practical at that time. But then, as I see no questions and no hands raised, I'll hand over to Fang for some concluding words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anatol, and thank you, everyone. So thank you very much for your active attention and participation in today's session. A special word of thanks to Jyoti Hosagraha and Marie-Noël Dourneau for their presentations, and to Nicolas Clark for his very useful intervention just now. After listening to the presentations, I wish to express our sincere gratitude to the late Dr. Roland Van Rons, my brother-like friend, on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the whole recommendation. Ron was the author and the driving force for the elaboration of the whole recommendation, which was adopted by UNESCO's General Conference in November 2011. Ron was a brilliant professional in the field of urban heritage, and his passing away in April 2015 is a great loss for the World Heritage family, and he's been missed immensely. All the colleagues who knew Ron will long remember him. Now, the presentations and discussions today are very important for the World Heritage National Focal Points and site managers who are ensuring the daily management of World Heritage properties, in particular, historical cities and urban heritage. Apart from the periodical reporting exercise, the theory and practice relating to urban heritage and sustainable development are important components for the protection and management of World Heritage sites. Therefore, I would hope that this comprehensive training session could help you all in your daily work for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. This session concludes our online training and debriefing session, which we have been running since September of last year to accompany you during the periodical reporting exercise. However, we are not disappearing. On the contrary, as we mentioned earlier, the early review of the questionnaire is ongoing, and the deadline for the early completion of section 2 is at the end of this month, as Michelle just reminded all of you. Reviewers will look at the questionnaires and reach out to you on a case-by-case basis, and we look forward to cooperating closely with you. In the meantime, if you have any question, either about the contents of the questionnaire or for logistic issues, such as access problems, technical glitches, or changes in personnel account, please do not hesitate to reach out to us via the dedicated email address, which is shown again in the chat. I would like to thank you all for your active participation in these sessions, which we hope have been helpful to you, not only to fill out the questionnaire, but also to shed some light on key aspects of World Heritage conservation. Let me close by reminding you that you still have until end of July to finalize the questionnaires, but please aim to complete your work as soon as possible in order to give enough time for national focal points to review section 2 questionnaires and to make full use of the earlier reviewers' time and attention. Thank you very much for your commitment to this important exercise under the World Heritage Convention. And I wish you a very successful submission of the questionnaires after all these training sessions. Thank you. 谢谢. Merci. Spasiba. Shukran. Gracias. Rahmat. Bayakala. Arigatou gozaimasu. Kamsahamnida. So finally, I would suggest that we all turn on the image and get a family photo as a sort of a temporary stop for our all training sessions. And I think we will continue this exercise in the next few months. Thank you. So I think, Michelle, you can do this screenshot or.
Yes, the Teams has given us new functions on how to do
Okay.
groups. This is very strange. I think I'm going to not do this. We're going to do large gallery. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, you got everyone.
Give me one second. It's loading on my end.
Yeah.
All right. Oh yeah, no, everybody's joining in. I think with a few more pictures, it'll be very nice.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Cheers. Yeah. One. Another one. Okay. Cheers. Thank you. You got enough?
I've gotten a few pictures. I think we should be all set.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay. So thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.
I'll continue with another meeting.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.